I forgave my wife's affair. I moved past the tears, the sleepless nights, the questions that ate my chest like acid. I told myself I was a bigger man than my pain. But 3 years later, one phone call from my own mother undid everything I thought I had healed from. Because that phone call told me exactly who my wife had betrayed me with. And when I tell you who it was, you will understand why I have not slept properly since. Stay with me till the end of this one, because this story will shake something in you. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button now before we go in, because you don't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. My name is Chidi Ume. I am 41 years old, and until 18 months ago, I believed I had the strongest marriage in Enugu. Not the loudest, not the richest, but the strongest. My wife's name is Ijeoma. We met at a wedding in 2011. Her cousin was marrying my old classmate, and I remember she wore a green gown that made her look like she belonged in a painting. I was shy that night. I am not a man who talks much when it matters, but something about the way she laughed at her own jokes before anyone else did made me walk across that hall and ask for her number like a boy of 19, not a grown man of 26. We married 2 years later. Simple wedding, no big grammar, just family and close friends. My mother liked her instantly, and my mother does not like anybody instantly. My father had passed 3 years before I met Ijeoma. So it was just me, my mother, and my younger sister Adaize standing on my side that day. I did have an older brother, Obinna, but Obinna was not there. Obinna had not been anywhere near our family for almost 6 years by that point. I will come back to Obinna. Hold that name in your mind. It matters more than you think. Ijeoma and I built a good life, slow, steady, nothing flashy. I worked as an engineer with a construction firm. She ran a small event planning business that grew from decorating birthday parties to handling weddings across 3 states. We had our son, Kamsi, in 2015. He has my mother's eyes, everybody says so. Round and always a little suspicious, like he's calculating something even when he's just a baby laughing at a balloon. For 9 years, I thought we were fine. Not perfect. No marriage is perfect. Anybody who tells you their marriage has no wahala is either lying to you or lying to themselves. But fine. Solid. The kind of marriage other couples pointed to and said, see them now, that's what we want. Then, 18 months ago, I found the messages. It was a Tuesday, I remember. Because Tuesdays were the days Ijeoma left her phone charging in the kitchen while she showered, a small habit she'd had for years, and a small habit that eventually broke my heart. I wasn't even looking for anything. I swear to you, I was not a suspicious husband. I picked up her phone because mine had died and I needed to check something on Google Maps for a site visit the next morning. And there it was, a notification. Not even hidden, just sitting there on the lock screen like it had nothing to be ashamed of. I miss you already. Can't wait for Thursday. No name attached that I recognized at first, just a number saved as Auntie Nkechi Taylor. Which struck me as strange because Ijeoma's tailor was a man named Sunday who worked out of a shop on Zik Avenue. I had been dropping off her fabric to that man for 6 years. I knew this. So why would a message like that come from a number saved as her tailor? I did something I am not proud of. I opened the chat. What I found took the floor under me. Months of messages, not just sweet nothings, but memories, plans, a hotel booking confirmation for a place in Owerri, photos I will not describe to you because some things a man carries alone. The person on the other end signed off some messages with a nickname, Your Obi. Not a full name, just Obi, which in Igbo simply means heart. And for a moment, stupidly, I told myself maybe it was just a term of endearment. Maybe I was reading too much into a nickname. I confronted her that night. She did not deny it once I showed her the screen. She sat on our bed, in the room where our son was conceived, and she cried. Not performance crying, real crying, the kind that makes a person's shoulders cave inward. And she told me it had been going on for almost a year. She told me it started small, just conversations, just someone who listened when she felt invisible in our house, and then it became something else before she even noticed the line had been crossed. She would not tell me his real name. I asked, God knows I asked. I asked with my hands shaking. I asked with my voice breaking. I asked at 3 in the morning when neither of us could sleep. She kept saying it didn't matter, that it was over, that she had already ended it the week before I found the messages, that telling me his identity would only make things worse, not better. I did not understand that logic then. I understand it even less now, knowing what I know. For 2 weeks, I did not sleep in our bedroom. I slept in Kamsi's room on a mattress on the floor, telling him it was because Daddy wanted to be close to him during his exam period, which was a lie children believe because they want to believe their parents. My mother noticed something was wrong on a phone call and asked me directly, Chidi, what is troubling you? And I told her nothing, because how does a man tell his mother that his wife stepped outside their marriage? How does a man carry that kind of shame to the woman who raised him to be strong? I nearly left. I want you to understand that. I am not telling you a story where the husband is some saint who forgives easily because forgiveness is holy. I packed a bag. I sat in my car outside our compound for 2 hours with the engine running, staring at Kamsi's bicycle leaning against the wall, thinking about what it would mean for that boy to grow up in a broken home the way I almost did after my father's death splintered our family. I went back inside. We went for counseling. Quiet counseling, not the kind you announce to family. Just a pastor's wife who ran informal sessions in her parlor twice a week. It took almost a year, but slowly something like peace came back into our house. Ijeoma became a different kind of present, attentive in a way that felt like guilt wearing the clothes of devotion, but I told myself, does it matter what wears the clothes if the clothes keep the family warm? I forgave her. I want you to hear that clearly, because forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is a decision a strong man makes when he still believes something is worth saving. I forgave her, and I never once asked again who Obi was. I told myself some doors are better left shut, that opening them again would only pour salt into a wound that was finally beginning to close. I was wrong, because 18 months later, on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, my mother called me from the village, and in the middle of an unrelated conversation about my uncle's chieftaincy title ceremony, she said something that stopped my heart in my chest. Have you heard from your brother? Obina called me last week. He says he wants to come home for the ceremony. He says he has changed, that he has been staying somewhere in Owerri for almost 2 years now, doing well for himself. Owerri. The hotel booking. The messages I had read 18 months earlier had a location attached to them, Owerri. I had told myself it was coincidence at the time, because Owerri is not a small place, it is a whole city. Hundreds of thousands of people pass through it. But something in my chest went cold hearing my mother say that word again, connected to my brother's name, on the same day the wound I thought had closed decided to remind me it was only ever a scab. Let me tell you about Obina, because you cannot understand the size of what came next without understanding the size of what came before. Obina is my elder brother, 6 years older than me. When our father died in 2007, there was a dispute over a parcel of land in our hometown. Land our father had promised, in words but never on paper, to give to Obina as the firstborn. But our father's will, the actual legal document, split the land between all 3 of his children equally, me, Obina, and our sister Adaeze. Obina believed our father had changed his mind because I had, in his words, poisoned the old man's ear by staying close to our father in his final years while Obina walked abroad in Lagos and rarely visited. It was not true. I never said a word against Obina to our father. But grief and greed do strange things to a man's memory, and Obina convinced himself of a betrayal that never happened. He fought the will in front of the whole extended family at a meeting that ended with him overturning a table and calling our mother a liar in front of 40 relatives. 2 months later, he sold his share of the land without consulting anyone, took the money and left. No calls, no visits, Not even when Kamsi was born. Not even when our mother was hospitalized for 2 weeks with malaria that nearly became something worse. 6 years of silence, broken only by rumors. Someone saw him in Lagos, someone heard he was in Port Harcourt, someone said he had traveled abroad and come back poorer than he left. I mourned my brother, the way you mourn someone who is still alive but chooses not to exist to you anymore. And somewhere in the back of my mind, in a place I did not let myself visit often, I always wondered, if Obena could hate me enough to disappear for 6 years over Lang, what else could that hate make him do? I did not sleep the night my mother mentioned Oweri. I lay beside Ijeoma, who slept peacefully, her breathing slow and even, while my mind turned over every memory of the past 2 years, searching for a thread I had missed. And then I remembered something small, something I had dismissed at the time as nothing. About 1.5 years ago, right around when the affair would have started, Ijeoma came home from a work trip to source decoration materials. She said she went to Owerri for a wedding client, a big one, a senator's daughter's engagement, she said. She came back with a new phone, said her old one had fallen in a gutter and gotten damaged beyond repair. I remember thinking it was odd that a phone could break so completely from a fall in a gutter, but I did not press it. I did not press many things back then, because I trusted Ijeoma the way you trust the ground beneath your feet, completely, without thinking about it, until the day the ground opens up. The next morning, I did something I promised myself I would never do again. I checked her phone. She had changed her passcode since the last time, of course she had. But I knew Ijeoma. I knew her the way you know a person you've shared a bed with for a decade. I tried Kamsi's birthday, nothing. I tried our wedding anniversary, nothing. Then I tried something that made my stomach drop before I even confirmed it. The date of her mother's death. A date she never forgot. A date so private that even I sometimes forgot the exact number until she reminded me every year with quiet grief in her eyes. The phone opened. I want you to pause here with me for a second, because what I found in that phone was not what I expected. I expected old messages, maybe a lingering thread that had never fully ended despite what she told me. What I found was worse. Buried in a folder labeled Kamsi School Docs, a folder she clearly thought no one, especially not me, would ever think to open, were photographs. Old photographs from years before we were even married. Photographs of Ijeoma as a much younger woman, 22, 23 years old, standing beside a man I recognized instantly, despite the years, despite the different haircut, despite the fact that I had spent 6 years trying to forget his face. Obena. Not recent photos, old ones, from before Ijeoma and I had ever met. If you're still with me, this is exactly where I need you to hit that subscribe button, because what I discovered next changed the entire shape of this story, and you don't want to be scrolling past when I explain it to you. I sat on the edge of our bed with that phone in my trembling hands for almost 20 minutes before I could make my mind form a coherent thought. My wife had known my brother before me, before any of this ever touched my life. My wife had dated my brother years before we ever met, and she had never once told me. I did not confront her immediately. I could not. I needed to understand what this actually meant, because a hidden ex-boyfriend from university, painful as it might be to learn years into a marriage, was not the same crime as an affair. People have pasts. I told myself this over and over, pacing the length of our compound at 2 a.m. while everyone else slept, trying to build myself a bridge back to reasonable thinking. Maybe she simply never told me because it ended badly and it embarrassed her. Maybe it was truly nothing more than an old, dead relationship, the kind everyone has buried somewhere. But then why hide it in a folder labeled for our son's school documents? Why keep photographs of a man who means nothing to her a decade into a marriage? A woman does not keep photographs of a man who means nothing to her. And Obi, the nickname on the affair messages, Obina, Obi. It had been sitting there the entire time, hidden in plain sight, and I had been too consumed by grief 18 months ago to see what should have been obvious. The man Ijoma had the affair with, the man whose messages nearly ended my marriage, it was not some stranger, some random man she'd met through work. It was my own brother. The same brother who had vanished from our family in bitterness and rage over land. The same brother who just told our mother he wanted to come home. I felt something in my chest I do not have a clean word for. Not quite rage, not quite grief, something closer to the feeling of standing on ground you believed was solid and suddenly discovering it was hollow the entire time. That you had been walking on a thin shell over a pit without knowing it. I confronted Ijoma that evening after Kamsi had gone to bed. I did not raise my voice, I want you to understand that. I did not shout. I did not throw anything, though God knows every part of me wanted to. I simply placed the phone on the table between us, open to the photographs, and I said one sentence. Tell me the truth about you and Obinna. All of it, now. She went pale. I watched the blood actually leave her face, and for a moment I thought she might faint. Then she began to cry, but this time it was not the crying of a woman caught in guilt. This was the crying of a woman who had been carrying a secret so heavy that its discovery felt almost like a relief. And what she told me over the next 2 hours rearranged everything I thought I knew about my own marriage. She had met Obinna first, before me, in her second year of university in Owerri, when Obinna had briefly relocated there for a business venture that eventually failed. They dated for almost 8 months. She said he was charming in those days, ambitious, full of big talk about the empire he was going to build, and she had genuinely loved him. But Obinna, even then, had a temper that frightened her, a way of turning cold and cruel when things did not go his way, and eventually she ended things after he humiliated her in front of her friends over something small. She couldn't even remember what she said, only that it had been small and his reaction had been enormous. They lost touch. Years passed. She met me. She fell in love with me. Genuinely, she insisted on this point with a desperation that told me she needed me to believe it. And she said yes to marrying me without ever once telling me about Obinna, because by the time we met, it felt like ancient history, a closed chapter that had nothing to do with the man standing in front of her. She did not know when she married me that Obinna was my brother. Think about that for a moment. She did not know. Obinna had never once in 8 months of dating her mentioned that he had a younger brother named Chudi. Perhaps out of the same pride and bitterness that made him erase our family from his life the moment the land dispute began. It was only at our own wedding, she told me, that the truth surfaced. Obinna was not there, I told you that already. But a distant cousin, unaware of the history, had mentioned Obinna's name in passing during the reception, joking about how the older brother was missing out on such a beautiful celebration. Ijoma said her blood ran cold in that moment. She said she nearly fainted at her own wedding table, realizing the man she had once loved as a young woman was her new husband's estranged brother. She never told me. Not that day, not in the 9 years after. She buried it, hoping it would never resurface, hoping Obinna's exile from our family would be permanent. But it did resurface. 2 years ago, Obinna reached out to her directly, not to me, not to our mother, but to her, through a mutual friend from her university days who still had her number. He said he wanted to apologize for the past, that he had matured, that he had heard she'd married well and simply wanted closure on old wounds before he attempted to reconcile with our family. She agreed to one phone call. One innocent phone call became a coffee meeting, which she justified to herself as harmless, as simply helping an old friend find his way back to reconciliation with people he had hurt. But Obinna, she said, had not changed at all. He had simply learned patience. And somewhere in those meetings that started as reconnaissance for a family reunion, he began to manipulate his way back into her heart, preying on a period in our marriage when I had been distant, consumed by a difficult project at work, coming home late, forgetting anniversaries I should not have forgotten. He told her things a struggling wife wants to hear. He made her feel seen in a season when she felt invisible. And she fell. Not in love exactly, she insisted, but into something dangerous and familiar, the pool of an old flame that knew exactly which parts of her had gone unattended. Here is the part that broke me most, and I need you to really sit with this, because this is where everything changed shape one final time. I sat across from my Ijeoma that night, feeling something crack open inside me that I don't think will ever fully seal shut again. Not just betrayal by a wife. That wound, painful as it was, I had already begun to heal from. This was something else. This was betrayal wearing my own blood. My brother had not simply drifted away from our family over pride and land. He had spent years nursing a hatred so specific, so patient, that he waited for the perfect moment to walk into my marriage and take the one thing that could hurt me most. I asked Ijeoma the question that had been sitting like a stone in my throat the entire conversation. I asked her about Kamsi. Our son was born in 2015. The affair, by her own account, began roughly a year and a half before I discovered the messages, which put its start date well after Kamsi's birth. Mathematically, there was no question about our son's paternity. I want to be clear about this immediately, because I know some of you watching are already jumping ahead, wondering if this story is about to reveal a paternity twist. It is not. Kamsi is my son. Every part of him, from the shape of his laugh to the stubborn set of his jaw when he refuses to eat vegetables, is mine. And no lie my brother told, no manipulation he orchestrated could ever touch that truth. But something else troubled me. Something Ijeoma revealed almost as an afterthought, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She told me that on 2 occasions during the affair, Obinna had asked to see Kamsi. Not casually, deliberately. He wanted photographs. He wanted to know what our son looked like, what school he attended, what days he was picked up and by whom. At the time, Ijeoma said, she interpreted this as a brother's natural curiosity about a nephew he had never met, perhaps even a sign that he genuinely wanted to reconcile with our family someday. I did not interpret it that way. Sitting there that night, understanding for the first time the true depth of my brother's hatred, those questions about my son's school schedule felt less like curiosity and more like reconnaissance. And that thought alone was enough to send ice through every vein in my body. I called my mother that same night, though it was nearly 11, though I knew she would be alarmed by a call at that hour. I did not tell her everything. Some truths a son cannot hand to his mother over a phone line. Some truths must be carried alone until the right moment to share them gently. But I asked her directly, urgently, has Obinna asked anything about Kamsi? Anything about where we live, where he goes to school? There was a long silence on the line before she answered, and that silence told me everything before her words confirmed it. My mother, without knowing the full story, had felt the same instinct I now felt burning in my chest. Something about Obinna's return was not the homecoming of a repentant man. It was the return of a man closing in on something. I did not sleep at all that night. By morning, I had made a decision I never imagined I would ever have to make. I contacted a private investigator, a man recommended to me quietly by a colleague who had once used his services for a business dispute, and I asked him to find out everything he could about my brother's life over the past 2 years, where he had actually been, what he had actually been doing in Owerri, and whether the story he was feeding our mother about his successful business venture held any truth. What came back to me 9 days later confirmed my worst fears and introduced an entirely new one. Obinna had not built a successful business in Owerri. He had in fact accumulated significant debt, nearly 4 million naira, across multiple lenders, some of them the kind of informal, dangerous lenders who do not send polite reminder letters when payments are late. The investigators' report suggested Obinna's sudden desire to reconcile with the family was not born of genuine remorse at all. It was born of desperation. He needed money, and he knew that reconciliation, however hollow, was his fastest route back into a family with resources. Resources that, under Igbo tradition and simple practical reality, would eventually be shared among siblings, especially with an ailing 80-year-old family compound sitting on land that had appreciated significantly in value since our father's death. Land that Obinna had once sold his share of in a moment of prideful rage. Land he now apparently deeply regretted losing. The affair with Ijeoma, the investigators digging, layering rumor and testimony from mutual acquaintances in Owerri suggested, had not begun purely out of revenge either, though revenge was certainly part of it. It had begun because Obinna believed for a time that if he could destabilize my marriage badly enough, I might turn to him, his estranged, forgiving, reformed brother, for emotional support during the crisis, opening a door back into the family that pure apology never could. He was, in the investigator's blunt words relayed to me over the phone, playing a long game with your entire life, sir. I want to pause here and tell you something important, something I did not fully understand until I sat with all of this for several days. Betrayal rarely comes from one direction. We build our defenses expecting danger from strangers, from the outside world, and we leave our backs completely open to the people closest to us, the people whose love we never think to question. My wife betrayed me, yes, and that wound was real, and it nearly ended us. But my brother orchestrated the entire architecture of that betrayal, calculating and patient, using a decade-old relationship and a decade of resentment as his tools. Two different kinds of pain tangled together into one, and I had to find a way to face both without letting either destroy the family I still had left to protect. I did not confront Obinna over the phone. I did not want to give him the satisfaction of hearing my voice break. And some part of me, some old, stubborn, hopeful part of me, needed to look him in the eyes when I finally said what needed to be said. So I told my mother to proceed with the plans for the chieftaincy ceremony as though nothing had changed. I told her Obinna was welcome to come home. She was overjoyed, thinking her family was finally healing after 6 painful years, and I let her believe that a little longer, because I needed Obinna to walk into that compound believing he had won, believing the door was finally open before I closed it forever. 3 weeks later, Obinna returned to our hometown for the ceremony. I watched him arrive from the veranda of our family compound, and I will not lie to you, my chest tightened at the sight of him. He looked older, thinner in the face, but somehow broader in the shoulders, the way men look when the years have been hard, but they have also been working with their hands. For a fraction of a second, some old, buried part of me, the part of me that was a little boy who used to follow this man around our compound, asking him to teach me how to climb the mango tree by the fence, felt something close to joy at seeing him again. That feeling died the moment he smiled at me and said with perfect practiced ease, "Chidi, my brother, it has been too long." I let him settle in. I let him greet our mother, our aunts and uncles. Let him perform the reconciliation everyone in that compound so desperately wanted to believe was real. I watched him laugh with cousins, watched him admire Kamsi with an interest that now made my skin crawl knowing what I knew. Watched him accept our mother's tearful embrace with the ease of a man who had rehearsed this moment for weeks. That evening, after the ceremony's formal events had concluded and most of the extended family had retired to their rooms or began the drive back to the city, I asked Obinna to walk with me to the old mango tree at the edge of the compound. He agreed readily, perhaps believing this was the beginning of the private brotherly reconciliation he had been angling for. I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand this because I know some of you are expecting a shouting match, a physical fight, the kind of dramatic confrontation you see in films. That is not what happened. I stood beneath that tree where we had played as boys, and I looked at my brother, and I told him, calmly, that I knew about Ijeoma, that I knew about Owerri, that I knew about the debts, the loan sharks, the calculated timeline of his return, that I knew he asked about my son's school schedule. I watched his face change in real time. The practiced ease drained out of it, replaced first by shock that I knew, then by something colder, something that confirmed every fear the investigator's report had planted in me. He did not deny it the way a genuinely repentant man might, scrambling to explain himself, to apologize, to beg for understanding. Instead, after a long, heavy silence beneath that tree, He laughed, a short, bitter laugh that I will hear in my nightmares for years to come. You always had everything, he said. The land, the woman, the sun who looks at you like you hung the moon. You think forgiveness comes free, Chidi? I wanted you to feel for even one day what it felt like to lose something that mattered. He did not apologize. Not once. Even standing there, exposed, caught completely, some hardened, wounded part of him still believed he was owed something the world and specifically I had stolen from him. I told him in the same calm voice that our mother would learn the truth the following morning in front of the family that had just welcomed him home with open arms, and that he had one choice: leave the compound that night on his own terms, or be exposed and cast out in front of everyone whose forgiveness he had spent the last 3 weeks manufacturing. He left before sunrise. I never told our extended family the full details. Some truths are mine to carry, not theirs to gossip over. But I told my mother everything, quietly, in her room, before the rest of the household woke. She wept, not for Obina's exposure, but for the years she had spent hoping her firstborn would come home whole, only to learn he came home hollow, using even reconciliation as a weapon. As for Ijeoma and me, I will not tell you this story ends with a perfect bow tied around it, because that would be a lie, and I promised you honesty from the beginning. We are still married. We are still working through what remains of the trust that both my wife and my brother tore apart from 2 different directions. Some days feel like healing. Some days, watching her with Kamsi, I feel the old warmth return without effort. Other days, I look at her and see instead the folder labeled with our son's school documents that once hid a decade of secrets, and something in me goes quiet and far away. But I made a decision, the same night beneath that mango tree that has guided me since. I decided that my son will not inherit a broken home built on unspoken poison, the way I nearly inherited one from a father and brother who let land destroy what blood should have protected. I decided that forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not about pretending a wound never happened. It is about choosing every single day not to let that wound become the only thing that defines you. Obina has not contacted our family since that night. I do not know where he is now, and for the first time in my life, I have made peace with not knowing. Some doors are meant to stay closed, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. If you made it to the end of this story with me, I want you to know something. Betrayal does not always come from the direction you expect. Sometimes it wears the face of the person who shares your blood, your name, your childhood memories. But surviving it, choosing your family, choosing peace over revenge, that is its own kind of victory, quiet as it is. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think about the people closest to you and the trust you place in them, don't scroll away without hitting that subscribe button. There are more stories like this one coming, real, raw, and unforgettable, and I promise you, you will not want to miss what's next. Thank you for staying with me till the end. Take care of your family and take care of yourself.